Fishing on the British Columbia coast happened right from the day of the First Nations living here. And depending on where they were on the coast, different products were brought on the interior to trade with other nations for food. There was no monetary value to it. After first contact, the white people found that there was gold in the rivers. And that gold was silverback salmon that would return every year.
The commercial industry started before the turn of the last century, and it was really fueled by European interests. It was the actual technology, the invention of canning food, that changed the fishing industry.
They would have the canneries situated all up and down the main rivers in areas where the fish would have big runs.
So of course the Fraser River was a huge cannery area, but then up in the Central Coast there were canneries, and then in Prince Rupert there was big cannery industries in Prince Rupert for the whole northern fishery. It was a really multicultural industry. The Aboriginal women, Aboriginal men were the backbone of much of it. They were also the fishermen and the plant workers. Both places they were major players. In the beginning they were almost the only players. And that changed over time as more and more fishermen came, starting from Norway and Sweden. And then on the other side, the Japanese came. It was mass-produced, fast production, and tons of labor. I mean, thousands and thousands of people worked in those canneries.
In 1974, I was 24 years old. I was looking for work. I wanted to work in a resource industry. They hired me out in Steveston, told me to go on load a herring boat. That was the beginning of my career in the fishing industry.
I came out west in the late 70s and really wanted to immerse myself in West Coast culture. And somebody told me about how you can make really good money in the Shoreworker segment of the fishing industry. So I first got a job working a 12-hour night shift popping herring roe.
I came up to Prince Rupert when I was 20 years old, and I was from Vancouver, and I started working at a fish plant. It was all young people. Fishing industry was booming, money was flowing. It was a really exciting time.
The money was pretty good in the canneries because it was union money. You could work just about year round. You basically only get laid off for 3 or 4 weeks for Christmas, and then you'll be back in January.
Back then, we all lied about our age to get into the fish plants, right? And the money wasn't bad at all. Sometimes you wanted to quit, but when you seen that paycheck, you went, great, this is unreal, right?
When the peak of the run was in and the fish was coming in, it was crazy. They were moving millions of pounds of fish through the fishing industry every day.
We worked standing on the line in the cold with all the wet. It was really hard work.
You try to keep the floor clean, for example, in the slips and falls area, right? I think to a certain degree it was accepted as a risk in the industry. You just had to be as careful as you could.
You know, machines that chopped, machines that sliced, machines that cut, machines that crushed. A lot of machines where you could really run into trouble.
And you use your hands a lot, repetitive motions and a lot of strain. So it had a whole lot of things that added up to a tough place to work where safety and getting injured was part of the job, and often considered part of the job.
We just kind of accepted that as the nature of the work.
The company wanted to get everything through the plant as fast as possible. That was the #1 job of a fish plant manager, was to get that fish in from the dock into the can in the least amount of time. Certainly health and safety was at the bottom of their list of things to be concerned about.
It was an industry driven by the demands of production. And getting them to stop and think about the other issues during that time was really tough. You know, if you got hurt, go home. Get out of here. We don't need you, get lost. You know, I mean, it was that kind of thing. People it just wasn't on the top of mind.
There was no mandatory health and safety training program. You just relied on the person next to you and hoped that they had more than 2 or 3 days under their belt to explain how things worked. When health and safety issues arose, how they impacted productivity was how quickly they were dealt with by the companies. Guarding machines, lockout procedures, those things have always been a problem in our sector because they impede productivity.
I was involved in health and safety probably since the mid-70s. I was on for probably 20 or 25 years as the chair.
I became involved in the union with being a shop steward, with collective bargaining issues, being able to help people with something that I like to do, and I certainly was never afraid of the boss.
We expected safety committee members to mention stuff. If it's unsafe, try to address it now in between meetings, let's stay on top of it.
It was really the injustices that we perceived in the commercial fishing industry. Those were the years that women were still paid less than men. So there was pay equity issues. There was certainly safety issues.
I think we were able to address a lot of these issues. You didn't always get what you wanted, but you made them aware of the issue, the employer.
There was a growing level of awareness that the repetitive motion work was onerous work. I think that's around the time the union really started to lobby for WCB claims for repetitive motion strain. And WCB would always come up with some kind of reason why you should not get a claim.
There's certainly an acknowledgement that all the way through the 80s and going into the 90s, musculoskeletal injury claims were not accepted. Many of them were denied. The reason for that was board adjudicators didn't really have any information to go on. There were no scientific studies that had been conducted and established that, in fact, there was a correlation between musculoskeletal injury, carpal tunnel syndrome, and the workplace, and that was very important.
We looked at the injury rates in the fishing industry, and we wanted to do something about that. So we decided that jointly we would contract with UBC and that we would do a study of herring roe popping to see what's the best way to take the roe out of the fish, both to make sure we don't damage it, but also to protect the people doing the work.
The goal of the study was to identify the onset of upper limb musculoskeletal injuries in fish processing workers and the risk factors in the work related to them. I was specifically looking at 7 different techniques that were being used to extract the roe and which of the techniques had a lesser onset of musculoskeletal injuries related to the work. We indeed found the onset of full-blown carpal tunnel syndrome and tendinitis from pre-season to peak season, which was 6 weeks later, in a huge percentage of the workforce. And indeed, the companies that allowed workers to choose their technique or to vary their techniques had a lesser extent of injury.
Did we eliminate all the injuries? No. Did carpal tunnel suddenly disappear? No. But rates went down and people were healthier. And that's what it takes. We went to the bargaining table, we negotiated it, we went out and we studied it, we brought people in, we did it objectively, and at the end of the day, people were safer. Now that is how it should be.
The safety in the industry became a lot better because of the roles of safety committees in all of the plants and the initiatives that they took on to make sure each and every one of their individual work sites issues were dealt with properly by management and duly recorded in minutes. So the paper trail was there if action was not being done.
It took everybody. You needed the companies to take responsibility and own up to it, and you needed the WCB to enforce, because without enforcement and without consequences, then nothing changes. And that's what you had to have to make it work. And it was all those things working together that I think saved lives.
Just in the 1990s, I started to see things changing, and I think it was part because of the workers pushing for change, as well as the union, I think.
If there's a lesson, even after you do all that we did to clean this up, and we did, that if you don't keep it cleaned up, it just goes back. Because the power of production and ignorance combined together and lack of enforcement means that it will go back to the way it is if it's faster. Because it's just natural that production takes over and overrides safety.
When I look back at my career, I see an industry that was thriving, where we had so much work, where we produced such good quality fish, to now an industry that's looking at trying to get as much fish as they can in for the cheapest price and get it out of the country with the least amount of processing. Certainly, labor is losing the battle, but it doesn't mean that that battle was not worth fighting. And it doesn't mean that battle is not ongoing.
The obituary shouldn't be written yet. We still have viable fish stocks, viable fishing industry. It's much smaller than it used to be. It does things differently, but it's still a big part of the economy of a lot of coastal communities.
It was an industry that was hard, that was tough, cold and wet, but I still have really good memories of it.
We had a lot of laughs and a lot of fun, and there was a bit of heartache over the years, but I really enjoyed working.
My feeling is there's a lot of workers that have been in this industry for a long, long time, so anything that can be done to protect the resource and keep those jobs would go a long, long way to satisfying their needs for the future.
I was there 37 years, and I still talk about it. And when I talk about it, I'm still proud of it. We're the best damn shore workers in the world. We turned out one of the finest products in the world has ever seen in regards to the quality of the fish. Some people say it's a sunset industry. I still look at it as a sunrise industry. I think there's lots of potential for the fishing industry to still be here. And as long as I got a breath in my body, I will be fighting to make sure that there is a commercial fishery.